All right, so we had already made one application which we use to register the user. Yes. Okay, let's do one thing. Let me just create a new package itself, and then let's take it forward from there. Login session management 2. Okay, let me put this guy outside. Okay, right. So login session management obviously doesn't have any files and folders in it, which we created just now. So I'm going to create a templates folder in it. Right, and I'm going to create one app.py in it. Right, I'm going to create one utility file util.py. Right, and yeah, so in util.py we'll try to create the PG connection and everything. All right, I'm just going to copy things from this HTML files from the one that is already existing. I'm going to copy this into this templates folder, which we already have. Okay, and so get DB connection. I'm just going to not this time. I'm not going to create a class, but rather a simple function in the util file. So I have created certain variables, which is DB name. Yep. DB password, DB host, and so on. And I have to import psycopg2. Right, and return this connection object. Right, so return this connection object. No class, right? A simple util file, which is basically creating a DB object and returning that connection object. Clear? Let me just copy the schema file also. What does the schema file contain? Basically user profile, which we used for registration purposes, right? Which we used for registration purpose. Okay, let that be there. Or maybe like, I'll just copy this and put it into this. Right, done. Okay, so I have templates, and if you look at my app.py right now, it doesn't have anything. So what I'm going to do, right? I am just going to copy everything from here, and I'll just try to replace things quickly. So I am going to remove this class. I have this registration thing, so we'll continue to have it. His valid password is also something that we have checked. Login will come back. Login I'm going to recreate. Right, and home also I'm just removing the login required. And yeah, things I'm going to remove. Right, there is no. So where is my get connection function? From util import get DB connection. Right, So wherever I want, I'll just use the getDB connection function. Okay, so in the util, I'm going to create one simple user class. Right, util, simple user class user. Okay, let me call it a user profile. Okay, I'm going to have my constructor here. Self, I'm going to assign certain values to it. ID, name, email, password, hash. Okay, self.id is equal to ID, self.name is equal to name, self.email is equal to email, self.password hash is equal to password hash. A simple object. In the same thing, I'm going to write another function since it's a user class, right? I'll write another function which will basically a static method I'll write, right? Which can create, or maybe the class object, maybe a class method I'll create rather than a static, right? Which can create a DB connection, and this can get based on the get user by ID. I can provide a ID, right? And this should return the ID for us. This should return the user information, user data based on the ID. Okay. How do my query looks like? So I'm going to maintain my queries here. Get user by ID query is equal to select star from profile where ID is equal to percentages. This is my query, and I'm going to replace that percentages in the execution. Right. I know my query. So first thing is we have to get the connection object. Right. Then next thing is what should we get? Cursor object. Right. Once you have the cursor object, what do we have to do? Cursor dot execute. Right. This query followed by parameters. Have to pass the ID. Then user info, or maybe user record is equal to user dot fetch one. So it will return only one record, and we are going to get that record. If user record, right, then see return CLS. I'm going to CLS is nothing but the class name itself, right? So if we have to create an object, we will just use the class name, and here CLS is nothing but the class name. So I'm going to assign the values accordingly. So since I'm getting star, so the order would be user record of 0 would be ID. User record of 1 would be the name. User record of 2 would be email. User record of 3 would be password. Right? Let's say, for example, I will just say print user record. Okay, now let us try to execute this function. I'm going to use a Python console here. Let me exit out of this. Right. Let me recreate Python. Let me create a fresh console. Okay, done. So this is in the class development. Okay. From I cannot go to the CD. So let me do one thing. Let me go to the regular terminal. CD into login session management. So /ls CD into login session management 2. And here you have it. I'm going to create, let me see what is the data. So from util, not from util. Yeah, from util import user profile. Right. Now what I'm going to do is user profile. It's a class method. I can call it with a class name, right? User profile dot get user by ID. And I'm going to, what are our IDs? For example, right. Why is this empty? Let me close this. Yeah, right. So select star from user profile. Let us see what is the ID we have. So let me pass 1 as the ID. Let me just cross verify once. Name, email, password. That is correct. So I'm going to pass 1. Let us see. This is the information. Right now, if I say user, it is basically record user.id. I have 1. User.name. I have Srikanth. User.email. I have the email. User.password hash. Right. I have the hash, which means I have all the required information from this function. Okay, so this is one object. And in the same way, I am going to create one more object. So this is basically retrieving the data based on the ID. Another one retrieve the data based on the email, Same place of ID, I'm going to pass the email and I'm going to get the same thing, right? So where email is equal to, right? That's it. Now let me exit again here. Let me just try executing the same query. Right, I'm going to just copy paste the same thing. Okay, fine. From util import user profile dot get user by email, and I'm going to pass my email ID srikanth@gmail.com. This is the email ID that I had given, and I'm expecting a user object. Am I getting the user object?
Yes, sir.
Right. So now we are able to get the user records using the two functions. One is get by email. So we will be using this function at the time of login when user provides username and password, right? Which is email and password. I have to check if that email exists or not. Based on that email, we are going to fetch the record, right? And once you fetch the record, we'll be using that password to validate the password. Yes, done. Similarly, another, I'll tell you where we will use the ID, but another one is which is called ID, right? We are trying to fetch based on the ID. Right. So one we are getting the user information based on the email, another one which we are getting user information based on the ID. There are two functions. OK, are we clear with this user class? And both of them are going to return user profile object. OK, and now this user profile object, right? Let us inherit from the user mixin. In the Flask, we have a function called user mixin. From Flask, import user, or no, is Flask login import user mixin, and I'm going to inherit this class with user mixin. Right, so it gives some additional data to this. Right, it brings certain additional functionality because we'll have to inherit from the user mixin. Right, so this seems simple, right? It's a simple, easy class. Simple user profile class inheriting from Flask logins user mixin class, and it has a simple constructor which we are setting the values based on the columns in the user profile, right? And again, there are two class methods which are basically returns a class object, which basically returns a class object based on the ID or email provided to it. Are we clear with this? Right. Now in the app.py, right, I'm going to import. Let's keep the DB connection. I'm going to import from util import user profile class. Okay. And in the Flask login, right, we have used something called login manager in order to manage our login. So we are using a library called Flask login, and Flask login basically comes up with all the functionality that are required for the login, logout, and the session management, which I had already explained about you, login, logout, and session management, right? So now Flask login would actually come up with all the features for the login, logout, cookies, and the session management. Okay, it does take care of it. Now that is the reason we installed Flask login in our previous class, and we used login manager as well, and we are looking at that even today. Right. So from Flask login, import login manager. Right. So this login manager, I have to create an object for it by passing the app, which is the Flask application instance. Right. And I'll just remove this for now. Right. So I am going to have a hard coded salt. That way my passwords are always going to be unique. Always can be matched with the salt. And I am going to create one secret key as well. This can be any random string that you want to keep it, right? When you develop an application, you can place any random string. So it is basically a secret key. Only your application would know about it. So using the secret key itself, we will be generating cookies. Okay, so now the login manager, we have to load something called user loader. So login manager by default passes user ID to this function, and this function should return the user object based on the ID. So in the user profile, we did create one function get user by ID. Yes,
Yes, sir.
this login manager will by default call this function whenever it needs a user, and that is going to pass the ID of that user, right? And we are going to get that user information based on the ID, which we have written in the user profile class. User profile dot get user by ID, and we have passing the ID, and this returns a user object. Yes, right? Get user by ID returns what? A user profile object. Okay, right. So this is the load user which login manager uses. Done. So we have already seen, how to render, how to create user, how to register, how to validate password and all. So now let us look for login. So def and this, okay, at the rate app dot route. I'm going to create one route for login. Def login is the function name that I'm going to keep, right? And I am going to take a request object. Hold on a second. And the allowed methods here are, I'm going to allow two methods, get and post. Two methods. Clear? Right. And if request dot method equals to get. If it is get, then we are going to return the login HTML. right? So for now, let us try to get only. Let me go back to terminal and start the application. Exit out of this Python console, Python app.py. So this would actually start the application. Now let us go to the browser. Okay, login function is loading. Yeah, this user is loading. So you can always click on go to sign up, or you can, if you already have an account, you can just say sign in. Okay, done. Now I am going to provide my email ID and password. Right. So if we still have not access, so did we add a post method here? Right. We just have added the login method. Right. So this will throw an error. What error will it throw? We have just handling the get. Right. Are we handling the post here? If I submit login, what do we have in the login.html? It does submit to login, and the method is what? Post. Right. It does submit. Yep. Okay. It does submit. Let's close everything here and keep only something that is needed for me. Come back to that later. Okay, right. So if I try to submit, what would happen? What error will it give? I submit now. What error? Right? The view function did login did not return a valid response, did not return a valid response. For post, is it returning anything? Else is basically post, but I don't have anything for that, right? So for that, let us handle it for the post request. So first we will be getting email, which is request dot form of email, using which we get the email. Then password request dot form password. So this basically from the user interface, we are taking the email and password. Now I have to check if this email exists or not. I have which I have already written one function, right? User profile dot get user by email. So I'm going to pass this email, right? So this will return if user one record, else if that user is not found, return render template. I'm going to say login.html. Right. So here, if you see in the login HTML, to say invalid username or password, I'm using this invalid user variable in the Jinja in the HTML. Right. I'm going to say, because it is wrong, invalid user is equal to true. So that way, if I enter wrong email, it would actually say invalid user or password. Right. Now, after this, if at all, if user exists, meaning, okay, well, it is a valid password. Yeah, it is a valid email. Now I have to check for the password. Right. So what are we going to do? User. We have written a check password function. Right. Is valid password. Going to check is valid password by passing the password that is entered. So this takes two things: stored password versus input password, whatever is the incoming. First is the stored password, user dot password hash comma password entered by the user. If valid, we have, we'll see what can be done. Else We are going to say the same thing, invalid username or invalid email or password. If at all, if it is valid, return redirect to /home. Right, home page is simple. It doesn't have anything. Simple home page. Right. Now let us go back and go to the login page and enter certain username, password. If it is the valid data, it is redirecting to the login pages.
Yes, sir.
Right. No, this device only. Right. It which means it is logged in. But if I just say go back to the login page, right, it still asks for the username and password. Yes. Now what is that means is that it has logged in, but did it set a cookie? Let us check. Right. Let me delete this. This was the last. Delete this. Yeah. Right. So now just see what happens. Okay. I did log in, but did it set a cookie? Do you see any cookie value here? Nothing, right? So basically it has authenticated, but where are we setting cookie so that, I can track that user? We are not setting anything. We are just saying after if it is valid, we are just saying redirect, right? So this is where we have to say login user. We have to use the login user. Okay. Right. So from Flask login manager, we'll also use login user. Right. So let's try to use that function. Login user, and I'm going to pass my user object. I'm going to pass my user object. Done. So I just said login user and then redirected to the home page. Now let us go back and see what happens. Now let me go back to login page. Right. Right. Valid email. So let me just enter some random password. Right. It does say invalid username or password. Right. Let me enter a valid password, but a wrong email. Right. Then now also it will say invalid username or password. Now let me enter the right value and say login. Okay. What happened just now? Did it set a cookie?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Right. So it does set a cookie. How did it set cookie? Because I used a login manager's login user function, login user function. So this function expects user object. This function expects user object, and I have passed a user object. Right. How does it know, like, what is the user object here? So in while creating the user object, which class are we inheriting from in the user object? User mixin. We are inheriting from the user mixin. This user mixin comes from what? Flask login library itself, right? So we are using that, and hence login manager's login user function can understand, okay, this is a user mixin object, and this can set a cookie in the browser. This can set a cookie in the browser. Okay, now it is evident, right? Now, whether I log in or not, I can always access the home page. So let me open incognito mode. Let me open one incognito mode, right? Can I still access the home page? Have I logged in here? No, right? But I can still access home page. But what is the idea? Home page should be accessed only by those who are logged in. Home page should be accessed only by those who are logged in. And hence, if I have to do that, login manager also provides one more function. If you are using any of the protected URLs, only login user should be able to see that. Then, right, your login manager comes up with one function called login required. Login required. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this decorator. I'm going to apply this decorator on top of the home function. Right now, let us see if trying to access this. Oh, well, what has happened? What does it say? Unauthorized. If you want to access this URL, you need to have a logged in. You should log in if you want to access this URL now. Once you log in, it will not show this error anymore. It will not show this error anymore. What does it say? Unauthorized, meaning you are not authorized to see this view. You are not authorized to see this view, which means it needs authenticated. It needs authentication. So you need to provide your username and password, and once only after it validates, then it will allow you to access. Can we try that now? Let us try. Login. Let me try providing the right data. And you can also check right now in the application. Right now there are no cookies. Under cookies, right? I click on this URL. Right now there are no cookies. Now let me just click on login. It does going to set a cookie, and still it doesn't allow us to access. Okay, let us see what is the problem. Right, so we said login required and we said written home.html. Okay, what is the problem? So we did set up a proper secret key cookie, and we are setting up the ID, get user by ID, user profile, and done. So what is the problem? So it is after login home, login required. I did login. So now after logging in, what is the thing? Causing when requested athlete. Okay, login view and this problem because I spell a mistake. No, not that. User load, user ID, and this has to return. Okay, let's do okay. Got it. So this user loader, right? So it is saying that it has to give the ID. What is the type of the ID? What is the type of the ID? Data type of ID.
Given serials are in database.
Serial means what? It is an integer field,
Integer.
right? Now looks like when we call this, what it is sending is it is a string. Let me just say type of user ID. So let me just reload and go back. Reloaded. What is the type? It is a string, but actually the ID is what? Integer. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to convert this to integer and send. I'm going to convert this to integer and send. So rather I will do this here. If is instance ID of str, if it is an instance of str, ID is equal to int of ID. So this gets converted into integer. Now let me load. Right, so email, so it is calling email. Hold on a second. Why is the user loader function? Okay, you get user by ID. Why is it? See, I've given a same name. Email. So I have to update my email query also. Right, so now let's go back. So how is it? Is it working now? Right, does it say anything now? It doesn't have any problem. So which means it is authenticating and it is allowing you to access the protected URL. It is allowing you to access the protected URL. So get user by the user loader function, right? So we have, so this user loader function is basically sending a string, and in the get user by ID, what we are doing is, okay, boss, if at all, if it is a string, convert it to integer, and pass that as a parameter. That way it will replace that and gets the proper data, Are we good?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now we are able to log in, right? We are able to log in. But now what? Let me just modify a tiny thing in the cookie here. Application, cookies, and the URL. So I know this is the cookie, right? Now I'm going to remove one value from here, which means this was generated from the server. Server keeps track of this cookie. Server keeps track of this cookie. Now I have modified this cookie value in the browser. Yes. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
I did remove 0 from it. Now if I save it, okay, and if I request, on every request, it is going to send a cookie to the browser, so to the server. From the browser to the server, the cookie would be sent, the session ID would be sent. Now, server has the right session ID, but browser is sending a wrong session ID. So what happens then? Okay, so let us look at this request headers. And what is the session that it send? Right, it is sending 555. The actual server, the cookie that was generated was 5550. Now it doesn't have 0, which means it doesn't match with the cookie that was stored on the browser. And hence it cannot identify who this user is. And hence it cannot identify who the user is. Are we clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And hence
Yes.
is, and that
Yes.
is the reason you are getting unauthorized. Okay, let me go back to this. And now let me place that 0 back. Save it. Done. And now I'll try to reload. Now it is a valid cookie. Now server okay authenticates, and that is how we were seeing this welcome home page. Welcome to home page. Right. So this cookie is very, very important. This cookie is very, very important. On every request, this cookie would be sent, and that is how once you log in, it remembers who that user is based on this cookie, Are we clear?